Trying to follow up after Witch Queen is tough, and Lightfall definitely struggles in that front.
The narrative team here has fumbled the ball and yet also did some incredible work.
Low-key, like one of the best things of Lightfall in Patrol. It's like, why is Patrol harder than the contest mode raid? What do you think this means like for the game? Do you think the Zavala character will continue? Bife, thank you once again for joining us on this video audio adventure. Today we're going to do pretty much a giant roundup of all things Lightfall. Now the dust has pretty much settled and everything's played out, I think we'll do a giant discussion of pretty much everything, the whole expansion from top to bottom. This has obviously been a very, how would you say, mixed expansion. There's been some bad, but there's been definitely some good. There's definitely some silver linings in a lot of this, and I think it's been probably one of the more controversial expansions, I would say. But that's what we're here today to break down.
I would personally call it incredibly uneventful, but I mean, that's just me, you know.
Incredibly uneventful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, nothing happened at all.
It was just a very run-of-the-mill Destiny expansion, you know. It wasn't
exactly.
Wasn't any criticism, wasn't any crazy ratings, any crazy backlash or anything.
Yeah, nothing happened at all.
No,
in all seriousness, your first take there was actually rather accurate, but I think the dichotomy of how you break down the conversation really depends about what area of the game you're interested in.
Yes, exactly.
So, yeah, it's all relative, as is the favorite thing for anybody who's trying to actually dissect all of it. So it's very easy to go ahead and pile things in with Lightfall good, Lightfall bad, but the reality is Lightfall is a complicated beast, so it's worthy of some breakdown.
The key word there is relative. As we'll get into, we're going to break down all the topics and get into everything, but you know, there are some people, as I said before, and we've probably said, it's like, if you really care about the story and you care about specific things, you might have really had a bad time with Lightfall. You might have been like, what am I even playing? But then again, there's also a lot of people who just skip all the cutscenes, don't care about the story, don't even know like what a witness is, and they're just like, I just want to shoot aliens and I just want to play Crucible Trials, and all this story is just like, I skip past it. And to them, they wouldn't have even noticed anything different. So it's a very mixed one, but yes, appreciate everyone for joining or watching or listening wherever you happen to be. And also leave a comment down below what you're doing while you're listening to the podcast. I'm always curious because you guys always show up in mad support with these. You always guys seem to really enjoy them. So be curious to know, what are you doing? Are you making a sandwich? Are you working? Are you driving to work? Are you exercising? Are you playing Destiny? What are you doing while listening to this? I would be curious to know. But generally, Bife, how would you say the consensus? And again, like I said, it's mixed. But what would you say? How would you summarize if someone was to ask you, how is Lightfall? What would you say?
I would say that the term mixed bag underdoes it, but also I would say that at its core, the foundations of Destiny, when you break it down into a mechanical sense, is really solid now. Like, Bungie swung at a lot of things and missed some and did not miss others. I mean, everyone's going to obviously talk about the story, which of course is going to stand out like a sore thumb because it's the thing that everybody plays through so they can get access to all the new goodies, including Strand. And that undoubtedly did fall flat. You know, there's pretty much clear consensus at this moment in time that the story is not what people were expecting, and people are not okay with what happened with regards to the way that everything panned out and how it seems like lots of moments in the story just really fumble the ball and there was nothing that was explained whatsoever. But by that same token, if you look at the actual core of Destiny itself as far as a shooter, and if you look at the mechanics, if you look at all the different things that Bungie was aiming to do, a lot of those things have been accomplished. I mean, if you look at just some of the most simple stuff, you go ahead and take a look at how they have retooled the mod system. And the objective there was to make it much more understandable and approachable so that build crafting was easier, whilst also not ruining all of the power and completely downgrading players. And on reflection, Bungie has kind of accomplished that, you know? Like, we've lost a lot of the make-a-build kind of mods, you know, things such as, say, Surprise Attack, where it's like if you were going to use a sidearm, you were going to use Surprise Attack. But by that same token, lots of the stuff we have in there is powerful enough that it doesn't really matter, and some of it has led to absolutely absurd things out there in the game, where you're able to use new bits of Strand or old bits of the Void 3.0 stuff to do some really remarkable things.
Yep.
So, mechanically speaking, the game's in a great place. Narratively speaking, it is in a really, it's in a really treacherous one. You know, it's very dangerous right now, in one sense, but in the other, it's actually in a very good spot, which makes it a very weird time to be a Destiny player who cares about both those things. Because, yeah, you know, there's lots of great stuff going on in the game, but don't necessarily look at the story right away.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, I think most people, I think you summed up the consensus pretty well. The core game itself, I would say, is in probably the most polished state it's ever been, especially if you look at the entire timeline of Destiny, especially Destiny 2, which has been a very, as we've said many times, the game has transitioned from the Destiny 2 in 2017 to the Destiny we have now, which is basically like Destiny 3. They kind of, I mean, all the 2017 stuff is gone. So now we have a new game, and it was very rocky getting there. But the actual game, like you said, the mod system, I think if I was to give an award to the strongest area, I do think the mod system is very solid. Some people say it's a little bit too oversimplified, but I think it was kind of necessary to get in a lot of new players and more casual players who don't interact with builds at all, and they were kind of scared off by the mod system. But Void 3.0 is like probably one of my favorite builds ever in Destiny, with the collective obligation, the Vow, pulse rifle, and just suppress and weaken and volatile, and just it's one of the most fun builds I've ever used. But then of course there's the other side. There is there's three different things. There's the story, the campaign, and the lore, which are all three different things. The story itself unanimously is bad, wasn't very good.
Yeah.
The campaign, which is like the actual missions, the gameplay of that campaign experience, very good. Running around Neptune, new stuff, it's a cool environment. The campaign itself was good. And the lore, which is always pretty good, that's kind of hard to fail because they can just, write up anything and make things make sense. But the connection between the story itself was, as I said, quite bad. But then the lore kind of makes up for it. And there's a lot to be said. A lot of people, I think correctly, and I agree, say that it isn't enough just to make a bad story and then make up for it later with good lore. Like you do, a lot of people do buy the expansions just to play the campaign, like a traditional game. You buy it, you beat the campaign, you beat the final boss, who is Calus, and then that's the game. If you bought it for that, you'd be a little bit like, I don't know what just happened. I don't know what the veil is. I don't know this witness guy. Like, I don't know what's happening there. But there's kind of a distinction between the lore, the story, and the campaign. And they're all, like we said, very mixed. But you are the lore aficionado. What do you think about that?
Honestly, I've got to say that this is the really tragic split down the middle for me, because the narrative team here has fumbled the ball and yet also did some incredible work. Like now that all of the lore of the expansion and of course the attached season is out there for everyone to see and experience, there's some amazing stuff that's happened in the lore. And that's really great to see. I mean, the Nezarec stuff in itself is brilliantly written, does a bunch of great stuff. The lore that's actually attached to Neomuna, whilst it's not everybody's cup of tea, is definitely some really awesome stuff as far as just the ideas that it explores and the different bits of Destiny's history that it touches on. And then there are really cool hints to the future as well, like if you take a look at the Winterbite quest, for example, that probably leads us on to the Season of the Deep and ties in Spire of the Watcher through the AI that was the quote-unquote Watcher now being found here on Neomuna. There's some really cool bits and pieces in the lore, but it just kills me to sit there and have to say that, yeah, everything you said earlier about lore does not make story is completely correct, because for as wonderful as the lore is, the story is... I said I've given my piece on criticism of the story, but it's a lot was left to be desired, and that was really quite unfortunate. It's one of those moments where I really do wish that something had been done differently. I'll be honest, at this point, I don't know what's really going on there, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff when it comes to Destiny's narrative that has improved over the years, and the improvement just wasn't seen here. At this moment in time, I could go on about the campaign, but the criticism has been done to death. If I went ahead and said any more, it's one of those things of it certainly isn't helping. If there was an And I'm pretty much guarantee that there's probably a dev at Bungie who is listening to every single piece of feedback that anyone has given, and they've already heard all this. So there's no point in me saying it's like, hey, all the same stuff I've said before totally applies. Like, they don't explain what the Veil is, they don't explain what the Radial Mast is, they don't explain where the Witness went, which, perhaps is part of the future mystery of everything. They don't give anybody any kind of idea of what's going on in the future, and they don't give any kind of notion to unveiling some of the important mysteries that we expect to be unveiled at the penultimate chapter of Destiny's 10-year saga.
That's the key part.
There's a lot that they really should have done and could have done here, and I think that for its position, it's something which really wasn't okay. Like, let's put this into perspective, right? If this was an expansion that released instead of Shadowkeep, I want you to just imagine that. Instead of Shadowkeep, we would have heralded this as an amazing expansion,
Yeah.
This would have been totally groundbreaking. Now, granted, everything that happens in one expansion can't happen in another, but it's about partly the placement, and it's also about the trajectory of everything that came before, When it came to Shadowkeep, we'd come off of Forsaken, which was a good story, but it was the first really good Destiny story I think lots of people had seen in D2. And it was one of those things of like, okay, this is something that bucks the trend. It's not really something that builds it. And, I think in that perspective and in that context, you could have seen Lightfall be something really incredible. But again, it's the 9th out of 10, and it's called Lightfall. And I mean, it seems pretty clear that we lost at the end, but no one seems to be particularly bothered. I mean, by the end of it, Ikora should have been, really distraught, as should Zavala, as should everybody. But it just, there was no Thanos snaps his fingers sense of we lose.
Yeah.
It was just it was a thing of everybody sitting around and sort of scratching their heads.
Yeah.
And, I think too, it's just after we came off of Witch Queen and Season of the Chosen, Season of the Splicer, Season of the Lost, all of these amazing narrative moments that had led up to here. Hell, even taking a look at Season of the Plunder and Season of the Seraph, you had some incredible narrative stuff going on in there. So if you look at all of this and you say that it builds to this point, it's like having your Oscar announced, walking up to the stage and then, pulling a Jennifer Lawrence and falling on one of the steps walking up. And it's really unfortunate. And, the hope is that you do a great acceptance speech with Final Shape, but like the moment still happened and that still sucks. Yeah. It's just like, well, here we are.
It was built up to be a grand moment. And I think that's the, like you said, so a lot of people instantly had the reaction of like, this isn't great. There was a lot of, on day one, a lot of criticism of something isn't right here. But I think it's justified. It's not, I don't think it was, there's no smoke without fire. A lot of people who were experienced with Destiny instantly got the sense something is off here. This doesn't seem to add up. And you mentioned Shadowkeep. The thing about Destiny expansions is there's always a story of the Bungie development, the behind the scenes that kind of explains the expansion. So like, obviously Shadowkeep was the one where they had just split from Activision and their whole studio was being redesigned, literally like new buildings. They had to dedicate an entire portion of the Bungie staff to do what Activision used to do, so the publishing side of things. And now Bungie they self-publish, so it's a whole thing that an entirely separate company used to do that they did. So they restructured their whole company. So Shadowkeep, and they even kind of said that this is a little bit of a filler expansion. We're doing our best, but our whole company is being just completely overhauled. So give us a bit of space, there's a bit of leeway there. And Beyond Light was basically the kind of intro of Destiny 3 where they had to rip out huge chunks of the game in order to make way for Beyond Light, Witch Queen, and Lightfall, and then Final Shape. So it was an ugly expansion. The expansion itself, I feel like some people have mixed opinions on Beyond Light, but I think Beyond Light was the expansion itself was good, but because it came alongside as a lot of bad things like sunsetting and vaulting and stasis was quite a rough introduction. I think that kind of soured it, but I think the actual content itself in Beyond Light was very solid. But there's always a story with this stuff. And then Witch Queen was, unanimously one of the best expansions ever. And now Final Shape, Lightfall, again, there's a story which many people have kind of pieced together, and there's clues of evidence, and there's rumors, and there's rumblings, but we all kind of get the gist that, I mean, we all kind of know that originally they planned to do 3 expansions, the Beyond Light, Witch Queen, and Lightfall. And then they announced, in their own words, they said, we realize we need to do an additional expansion, an additional chapter. And I think I mentioned it in my video, but I think that's the key reason why a lot of people weren't happy, because they made it seem as if Final Shape was an additional expansion, as in Lightfall was still Lightfall, and then we're going to add an additional one. But what they actually is kind of clear is that Lightfall is the additional expansion, and Final Shape is what Lightfall used to be. But then it's still called Lightfall, which appears that it would be a second collapse, which has also been teased for a long time, but then that didn't happen. The Traveler left, but nothing really happened with it. So as you said, it doesn't really seem like the name Lightfall doesn't fit. They probably could have renamed it to, the Neptune Adventure, because it definitely seems like a spin-off.
Yeah.
And then there's the thing about Strand, and it overwhelmingly does seem more likely that it would have been in Witch Queen when there would have been 3 expansions. There's a lot of kind of, you can see the seams of how they've ripped stuff apart and repackaged stuff. But going back to the story, I think that's why, honestly, I wouldn't really put too much blame, if you could say it that way, on the narrative team. I feel like the narrative team are just kind of doing what they're told by the higher ups, who are like, okay, so change of plans, we're going to do another expansion, Final Shape. We need to do another expansion called Lightfall, and can you guys make this make sense? And I think the narrative team probably has the toughest job of having to cobble this stuff together and make, because Bungie have their overarching game decisions of, okay, we're going to release this quarter here, we're going to do this thing here, based on the realities of what they can do, logistically and financially, like, and development time, how much they can allocate resources to do. This is what is physically possible. And then they decide, okay, we're going to do these number of expansions. And then it's up for the narrative team to be like, okay, make this make sense. Give us a reason to be on Neptune. Give us a reason to be messing around with Strand. Kind of tie this in. And then that's where it kind of is obvious that it doesn't really line up too well.
I mean, so prefacing anything said there, like, obviously it's impossible for any one of us who isn't inside the studio to know. Yep. Whilst that narrative makes a certain amount of sense, it's definitely one of those things of like, with speculation only, we'll never truly know what it was like.
Yeah.
What I will say is that it's very clear the narrative team is really talented.
Yeah.
And, I understand there's going to be someone out there who's shaking their head and being like, what the hell is he talking about? Bungie shill. But really, like, when you sit there and realize this is the same team that wrote all of the lore behind the raid and has written some incredible things around this expansion, you do realize that the team is talented. You can't dispute that fact. And so if it's one of those moments where, if this is something that has occurred, then you're looking at a moment where the narrative team may have been asked to make the best out of what they could. And you know what? All things considered, there's a lot of good stuff that I think they've been able to do on that particular front. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. It is entirely possible that, the blame lies somewhere for something or other. But I think the important thing to accept on that front is the fact that it is impossible to look at the narrative team through the lens of black and white, if you think on that front of things. Like, yeah, sure, they have most definitely given us a failure, so to speak, with the Lightfall campaign, but you can't immediately sit there and say that they are wholly defined by that alone. Like, there is great stuff that they've done there, and whether that's something to do with studio decision making and whatever's going on with things, it's really hard to go ahead and tell on this front of things. I think the one thing that I would go ahead and throw out there, though, is that when it comes down to it, there are people who are really passionate, like myself, about the game and about its story. But the thing that's really important is to remember that any of the devs who are working on this are passionate about it too. Like, I've sat down and spoken with members of Bungie's narrative team over the years, and not a single one of them has gone and given me the impression that they're phoning it in. Like, even if they only stay for a few years, even if they only manage to add a certain number of things to the game, they genuinely do care about the stuff that they're throwing out there into the world. They genuinely do care about what they're making. And so, you know, I feel like that's something that should be thrown out there. It's really easy to say, game bad.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, campaign was bad. But let's not forget for a moment that, like, hey, you know, there are clearly devs that tried really hard on some of this. And no matter what the reasons are why the campaign was awful and didn't explain the Veil and a bunch of other bits and pieces, you know, it's very clear that when we actually sit down and look at the way that games are made, you know, sometimes it's really hard. And
there are a lot of teams. There are a lot of
passion
different
that goes into it.
Bungie's like 1,000 employees, and it's many teams of many people. And then there's, as I said before, like there's, you know, the lighting team, there's the sound design team, there's teams that are completely disconnected from what most people would criticize, who just like, well, I did my job great, but it's all like, you know, like the skyboxes and the set design for Neo Moon. I think most people would agree that stuff is all top notch, as always with Bungie. The quality and the look and the feel of the game never disappoints, but some things that people may not like kind of just get thrown in with the entire rest of the game. And like I said, I think, you know, if you want to blame anyone, if anyone's to blame, you know, developers, as always, they're always trying to do their best, designers, they're artists, but the leadership who make the decisions, it's kind of a tug of war between the leadership makes the decisions of this is what we're doing, this is when we're going to do it, this is what we want to release, we're going to change our mind, we're going to do this, that. But then the developers themselves, just they're doing their best with what they're told to do. So it's kind of a tug of war between the teams, and I can imagine it's quite messy. But also something I'd noticed is that it's the three, what would be seen as the three best expansions in Destiny would be Taken King, Forsaken, and Witch Queen. Those three are unanimously seen as the best expansions. The interesting thing I noticed is that those are all 1 year after the main game releases. So Destiny 1 in 2014, and then the next year you had Taken King to kind of make up for everything, and that was, you know, heralded as just great still is to this day. And then Destiny 2 came out the next year. Forsaken came to just fix things, and both Destiny 1 and 2 launch was rocky. And then Beyond Light, which is kind of like the Destiny 3 but just put into Destiny 2, again very rocky because they took away a bunch of stuff, so it wasn't in a great state, and it was just messy, and they were trying to transition games. But then the next year you had Witch Queen, and that again was heralded as just great. And then, like you said, the fact that Lightfall came after Witch Queen is also why it's extra scrutinized, because Witch Queen was so good, and it kind of puts in perspective how good Witch Queen was. Like it really
raised the bar,
and we knew it at the time. But it trying to follow up after Witch Queen is tough, and Lightfall definitely struggles in that front. But it's
100%. I think it's also one of those things of like it has properly highlighted the fact that Destiny is a universe full of potential. And the characters that you've got there are great, but there's also certainly, I mean, you know, there's certainly some strength to, in your last few expansions, wrapping up stories with characters that you knew. I mean, just to give you an example of things, I think that one of the strongest storylines within Lightfall, as its campaign goes, is the opposition between Keitel and Calus. You know, and here's the thing, they don't say that much about it in the campaign, so if you just played the campaign and only knew about that, you would expect it to be you would think it was kind of weak, but the reality is we've known about this beef for well over half a decade now. You know, it's been going back ever since the Leviathan, since we got the collector's edition stuff for D2 Vanilla, where Calus actually calls out Keitel by name as one of the conspirators. It goes on through all of the different bits and pieces of lore. It was heavily brought to the forefront in the Season of Opulence and the Season of the Chosen, where respectively we were working closely first with Calus and then with Keitel. You have a ton of different bits and pieces that have very clearly acted as a prelude to Lightfall's father-daughter opposition, and this is what's really great about it. You know, they took a big storyline and they brought it to what is, at the end of the day, a satisfying conclusion, whilst also giving Keitel a foot in the door where her story can continue. And this is now just a really important part of her character development, and she's grown from this. That stuff is really strong, all on its own. It stands in this really kind of like respectable place, I think. the thing that really irritates me is actually the fact that this was put alongside new characters. Now, here's the thing. The cloudstriders contextually make a lot of sense. When you talk about Nimbus, they are most definitely someone who should be in the story, considering that it's on Neptune. But I can't imagine that it would have been way, way stronger if we had been introduced to these characters at a sooner point, or if the expansion had them in some context where we knew we would be able to unfold their story later. And if they were just sort of an aid that helped us focus on the main plot thrust of things, which was Calus serving the witness, us opposing Calus, us helping Keitel, and then also all of us, this kind of like opposing two sides, racing to get to the Veil and trying to see what's going on with that. You know, if the story had been all about that, I think you could have had a real winner there, because it's focused. It allows you to pull on the more intense emotional thread of the campaign, which is clearly about Calus and Keitel. You could have had more room for all of that. And, you know, it's very easy for me to sit here and say all of this, you know, like, if I was the game developer, I would have done this. But, you know, that's where I think the real strength of Lightfall lies. And I would have loved to see more of that.
Yeah, I think, I think the cloudstriders were pretty unanimously not the strongest point of Lightfall's campaign. I think it's just a bit of a, I don't know, kind of oil and water. They weren't. It seemed like not really the time to be. I mean, the whole of the narrative of just kind of messing around on Neptune and getting stranded. It seems a bit just like, okay, so the worst thing that could have possibly happened is happening. Like the Arbiter of Doom is coming, the big bad villain, and possibly, you know, the end of life in the universe. And now, like, Strand itself, it just seems a bit like there wasn't any reason for us to actually use it. It wasn't like, oh, you have to use Strand in order to unlock the Veil, or like it's essential. They didn't explain why it's important. It's just, we've got this very dire mission to try and stop the Witness blowing up the Traveler or whatever it wants. But then in the meantime, we're like trying to learn this power, and it's like rejecting us, and it keeps getting taken away. It's kind of like, is now the time to be trying to learn some new random superpower that isn't necessary? Should we just stick? I mean, that's what I did personally in the campaign. I was like, you can keep your Strand. I'm gonna stick with Void 3.0. I'm trying to like actually do this legendary campaign. Now is just not the time to be messing around with these two random characters that one of them's kind of annoying and one of them's kind of boring, and then they die before you even get to know them. And then it just seemed like the urgency of the overall plot did not match the just randomness of Neptune. So there was a bit of a disconnect between that, and the cloudstriders were the face of that, so it just seemed a bit like odd.
It's so interesting, because when Bungie talked about all of this in the kind of vidocs and trailers and whatnot, they talked about how they wanted the campaign to feel like an action movie, like an 80s action movie, and in that sense they totally succeed. Here's the thing, and this is a comment that's been made by a bunch of people, that tone was not right for this moment. You are completely correct. This is an apocalyptic story, you know, this is the Infinity War of all this. You can have your heroics, but in service of stopping something really dire, which ultimately we failed to do. And it does feel as though it's a very long, extended Strand tutorial that is only even possible because Calus is kind of lazy, if you get what I mean. Like, you know, halfway through the campaign, the radial mast gets pulled out of Calus's ship, the Typhon Imperator, and it's supposedly going to link with the Veil, which, you know, for reasons that aren't explained, that's really bad. But it's one of those things of, you imagine that if Calus had really been serving the Witness properly and was really effective, he would have probably pulled that out immediately and would have been, you know, intent on doing that, maybe mission 2. Like, the moment we failed to destroy the radial mast in the one mission where we actually go inside his ship, we should have been scrambling to stop him from deploying it properly, you know? Like, it feels like the only reason we get to go on our little Strand tutorial, which is, again, the best way to describe it, is purely because of the fact that we are in this place of like, hey, Calus is just like, find the best place for it. I don't want to bother. You know, reality's situation should be that he is terrified of the Witness, which at the end of the campaign, we do see a moment with that, and that he should be searching high and low to make sure all of that can get done. You know, like,
What did you think of the of just Calus's story in general? Do you think they wrapped up well? I think I was pretty happy with it. I think some people kind of said it seemed a bit lackluster for how long we've known the character, but honestly, I feel like it's about as best as they could have done. Like, he wasn't going to be a raid boss, he was going to be a campaign boss. Like, sure, I mean, Calus is probably one of my favorite characters. He's just a funny, entertaining character. But I feel like they did about about maybe the boss fight could have been a bit more exciting, and his final form of being this disciple could have been a bit more interesting. But I think, he was such a long running character, and he's such a one second he's your ally, and next second he's your enemy, and then he's being reborn as his disciple. I think I would have loved to see more of him, and especially more cutscenes for sure. Never get tired of a Calus cutscene. But what do you think about his story arc? Do you think they paid him off well? Do you think it's job well done?
I think that as far as looking at the overall story arc, it's totally fine. Like, yeah, they do a decent job of it. But if you're looking at Lightfall on its own, again, I wish there had been a little bit more. I would have loved to have seen a moment when Keitel rescues us from Calus's ship, her and her father go into some hand-to-hand proper Cabal combat. Like, I would have loved to get...
did we?
Yeah, I really wanted to get more of a dynamic between the two of them, because in this narrative, you can't have one without the other. They define each other's character because they are so interlinked. Calus never gets exiled without Keitel's actions, and Keitel never sits there and has this burden of leadership on her shoulders without the influence of her father. There is a moment at which those characters got intrinsically tied together, and I would have loved to see more of this stuff get expanded on. It's the fundamental problem, I think, with looking at Lightfall on its own. Like, it's an amazing wrap up to a 5 or 6 year long story of this character, but it could have delivered a little bit better with all of that. I will sit there and I will say, though, there are some really stellar moments with Calus. Watching him be absolutely terrified of the Witness was definitely something that contributed to it. Understanding his place and knowing the lore from the Collector's Edition too, and how that weaves in, all really good. It does make me wish that some of that Collector's Edition lore had been brought forward more into Calus's story, because it's clear that there is this potential regret, and there's some stuff in Calus's past that is still affecting him up until the moment at which he dies. And I just wish that, particularly considering that it could probably pertains to Keitel's mother, we don't know for sure, but considering that it probably pertains to Keitel's mother, who is the one that he seemingly truly loved, it's one of these moments at which you could have actually expanded upon that character and given them some real depth. That last moment where Calus dies, he cries out a name, and we don't know that this is Keitel's mother's name for sure, but it certainly seems like it could be. It seems like a very Cabal name. It seems as though it's a feminine Cabal name. We've never heard them before. We don't know of Keitel's mother's name. And in your last moments, what do you think of? When it was Rolk, he is totally obsessed with the Witness, and he was like, Witness, forgive me. And in Calus's last moments, he's not thinking about the Witness at all. He's thinking about whoever Kameli is.
And his regrets, yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things of, you could have had a really, really deep dive into that with the kind of narrative between Keitel and Calus, and I would have loved to see that. Because, that's the basis of their entire opposition. If you read the Collector's Edition, sorry, a little rant. If you read the Collector's Edition, Calus explaining that he felt like he couldn't go and return to Keitel's mother, and that there were all sorts of things going on in the background to do with Cabal politics and a whole bunch of things. That is the entire basis for Keitel choosing to oppose him in the Midnight Coup, because at the time being, she doesn't believe him. Her words, and you'll need to... I'll do this myself, but, she says in her journal entry on it, "Today I learned my father is full of..." It's it's one of those moments at which she sits there and gives a very honest opinion, and she doesn't believe him at the time, but it's very clear that Calus actually does believe himself. He is sitting there and is feeling a lot of pain over a love that was lost. And expanding on that and trying to understand where the good in Calus could have been and how it drew him into that dark path might have been a really strong way to go about the story. There's a lot of potential for some dignity in a villain's death, and for it to be the kind of melancholy moment between Keitel and her father at the end as she sees his corpse, you know, like that could have been really powerful. Also, it doesn't help that Nimbus then comes along and they're all like, hey, wow, your dead dad is real ugly. And it's like,
That was just like, and a fist bump. It's like, what are we doing here? Like, that was a very, very cringe moment.
Here's the thing too, Nimbus, I understand their place as a character, and I'm actually okay with them being a part of the narrative. I think it's actually kind of important to have someone that does provide relief, because if it's all grimdark, then, you know, there's nothing to remind you what to fight for. It's one of the most important principles of Star Wars, and even a grimdark universe like 40k, you know, like Cadia can get destroyed, but the important point is that when you come to the next era of everything, there is still hope, you know, like Robuta Gilliman getting revived and all that nonsense. Totally different universe, but you get my point. Like, hope needs to exist alongside the grim darkness. But the way that particular scene was inserted, I think, does Nimbus a huge disservice.
Yeah,
you know, that's it. Like, they have the potential to be a really impactful character, and I feel like that was a moment that got squandered. It just felt so out of place. Like, what are we doing? Like,
tone deaf.
I totally tone deaf.
Very much to this big, like, epic moment, and yeah, I just wasn't a fan of Nimbus's dialogue. I just never want to hear a character say the word vibes in like a video game. It just seems kind of just like, oh gosh, a Twitter teenager talking. It just seems a bit just like, why are you talking like a Twitter teenager? Like, this is not again, this is supposed to be a serious moment, and you're like, the comic relief just wasn't. I get the intention, but it didn't deliver well. But yeah, I mean, with Calus, I think the his kind of character development, it was consistent, because he's this gluttonous, greedy, kind of selfish emperor, and then he kind of, it was good to see the dynamic between him and the Witness, because the Witness is just this like stoic, just all-knowing, just unwavering, just whatever it and they are. It seems to be like a collection of like multiple people and multiple voices, but I'm sure we'll find that out in final shape. But the you see Calus he just becomes like a bit of a failure and just a bit of an embarrassment. He's like, yeah, no, I'm trying. It's like a boss, and it's like his it's like a supervisor and his boss. And he's like, you need to find the veil. He's like, yeah, I'm working on it. Yeah, I'm gonna find it. And then he's just like, you found the veil yet? Like, the Witness doesn't mince words. It's just like, update, like, where's the veil? Progress. And Calus is like, yeah, so we did this thing, and he's just like trying to like all these words. He's just like, let me know when you find the veil. Like, don't disappoint me. And he's just like, yeah, I will. So it's just like the dynamic. It really makes Calus seem like just kind of worthless, which is kind of funny. But it's his nature. You know, he's greedy and he doesn't really care, and he's kind of selfish. It was a funny dynamic.
Really self-aggrandizing. Calus in that moment is like the meme of a book report that you're reading out loud to your teacher, where it's like, this must be 500 words long, and the first 50 words are, in today's book report, I will read my book report on the book that I have chosen to write about in my book report. The book of my book report is Great Expectations. It's just like,
the Witness is just there, just looking, just like...
Yeah. Oh, dude, whatever you want to say about it, Witness was excellent in this expansion. Not just because of great story, but also there is an excellent meme of the moment before the Witness gets incredibly angry.
Yeah, when he's just like...
it's got that look on its face, and it's just like,
not impressed.
Bruh, what are you doing?
Not impressed.
It's like the best little bit of memeage that's come out of it. A reaction gif that I need to have someone recreate as like,
yeah, that instantly became a meme. I saw that around a lot.
So good.
What do you think of the Witness in general? My thing with the Witness is I feel like they've left it a little bit too late to explain stuff. I think because Final Shape is literally like the end of this saga. It's obviously not the end of Destiny 2 or Destiny, but you would probably assume that the Witness will die or be defeated, or something will happen to that extent. Some kind of big conclusion in the Final Shape. But I feel like it's going to take us, like 7-8 years, however long they've technically had the pyramids coming. I guess it's been a long-running thing, but I feel like by the time we finally get answers of what the Witness is, we don't know who the Witness is, what it is, where they come from, why they're doing what they want to do. Like, if you compare it to like Thanos, which obviously Bungie is taking heavy inspiration from this whole kind of endgame scenario, but the witness's motivations haven't been explained. And again, I said it in the last podcast, but we have zero reason to even care about what the witness is up to. I mean, obviously, if he deletes all life in the universe, that won't be good. But the witness hasn't barely even interacted with the Guardians, besides just offering us a subclass and salvation. The witness just kind of sidesteps us, just like, I'm here to do a thing with the Traveler. I'm not going to explain what I'm doing, but I feel like by the time we finally get to figure out what the witness is and all these very important questions of the main villain in Destiny, they're probably going to be dead. So I feel like now was the perfect time to actually explain some stuff about the witness, and then we can have a whole year of like build up and speculation, and also this is what the witness, this is where it comes from, and this is why it hates the Traveler, and this is what this whole Winnower and Gardener situation is, and just kind of explain stuff. But again, I feel like by the time we actually figure out what the witness is, he's probably going to be dead, or the story will be over. So I feel like it's a missed opportunity to introduce more of what the witness even is earlier, I think.
I couldn't say it better. And, you know, like, it's even more troubling because there is a lot of expectation from Bungie for the seasonal story for the next year to do a lot of the heavy lifting with regards to the actual story of the witness. And, you know, for the imminent moment, that is fine. But here's the thing. The moment that Final Shape comes along, all of the seasonal content for Lightfall is gone, as is all of that context of who the witness is, what they do, what they want, and everything else in between. I mean, it's a huge problem. Now, obviously, the one Veil quest that's meant to be coming out alongside Season of the Deep, that is staying and will be around even after the seasonal content has been shelved. But I don't think that's enough. I honestly think that if Bungie wants to do this right, and this is, you know, I said as much, this is not going to happen, but they need to keep that seasonal content around, especially if it gives context to what the witness is and what their motivation is, because, yeah, that's going to be really important. And if we don't know what that is, we're going to be in a huge amount of narrative trouble. I mean, we're already in a pretty deep hole, narratively speaking, so yeah, we've really got to address that, because people are going to come along to the Final Shape. They're going to ask who the witness is. The narrative is going to do as it does and just assume for the most part that people have played the seasonal story content and have understood what's going on. And even if they do give a quick 5-minute recap before we even step into a story mission, man, that is going to be so lame in comparison to what could have been in Lightfall here, where they sat down and provided all of this as a backdrop by which we could have learned about the witness and learned about what it wants and what it's trying to do and why it's been chasing the Traveler, you know?
I think there was
there was potential and it missed again.
Yeah. But I think we'll get some stuff in the seasons, like Season of the Deep. They'll definitely add some kind of build up, but again, even if you compare to Savathun, like Savathun had way more of an introduction, way more, like we knew way more about her. She was much more of a built up villain that had significance, that was, you know, people at least knew the name. Whereas, again, I feel like we knew way more about Savathun than we do about the Witness. So it just seems like for Destiny's biggest main villain, the thing behind the pyramids, the whole mystery thing. I know Bungie loves their mystery, and the pyramids have been mysterious for a long time, but I think it's a bit too late now. I think it's time for some actual answers on what this main villain is, and give us a reason to care. Give us a reason to actually like have either empathy or disdain for this character. Give us a reason to. But right now, there's just nothing to judge. Like, not a single person, even you, someone who probably knows more than most about the story, couldn't even say, where's the Witness gone? What was that portal with the Traveler? What's inside the Traveler? Why did he do the thing? Where does he come from? Like, it's these questions.
Like we have guesses.
Yeah.
We have guesses and speculation, and that's our best.
And we're nearly at the final chapter. So it's it's definitely a long time coming, but doesn't seem like it's been built up too well.
I got to agree. And there's a bigger problem with all of that, which as well is if you take a look at who the biggest villain in Destiny's storyline really is at this point, I think it's fair to say that it is actually Savathun. And that's not to sit there and say that Savathun has done the most evil, but it is to say that we've been teased about Savathun, and they were related to one of the biggest expansions. In fact, technically two of the biggest expansions that we've had in a long while, and they've been affecting the universe in way more tangible ways. You know, like the best we have about the Witness and where it's gone at current is speculations and guesswork, and that's really frustrating because when you actually want to try and dive into everything, you realize that we actually are pretty far away from it. In fact, yeah, okay, here's the really irritating thing. Sword logic, final shape, all these things. You know, we've had these things bounded about in Hive lore for a very long time. Anyone who's in Destiny and has a little bit of sort of an idea of what's going on in the lore may know about these ideas. These are things that have been put to us for years and years and years. And in the lore of this expansion, it has been shown to us that these ideas of what the final shape are in fact just subjective according to each of the Witness's disciples. So it talks about how in one instance, the final shape is supposed to be in accordance to Nezarec, who is willing to run this full gamut of existence just so that it can have as much pain, so that he can feed on as much pain as possible. And then you take a look at Rulk, who is just there to destroy and upend for the sake of the Witness. And then you look at the Hive, who believe that life should exist in the universe, and the final shape is the strongest life that can possibly exist. And all of these views, as this bit of lore is pointing out, are incompatible with each other. So the reality is that we don't even know what the final shape is according to all the old stuff that we've been given. Now, that can turn into a really good thing, because it can just turn out that the Witness is, you know, lying to all of these things and is just basically manipulating and using them, which is very in its character. But by that same token, it very much dissuades us from all the old ideas that we had about trying to understand the universe of Destiny and the final shape and what's going on with everything. And, you know, it throws so much into disarray with regards to our old knowledge. So yeah, it's really hard to know what the Witness is doing nowadays.
Also, touching on Savathun, do you think, I mean, I would assume it's kind of Bungie have kind of set up, but do you think she'll return, and in what capacity? And do you think she'll be somewhat of an ally, because, you know, she is, I guess, opposed to the Witness, so the kind of enemy of your enemy is your friend? Do you think she'll be some kind of unlikely ally? Because she is, I mean, she did say before Witch Queen, like, I'm not your enemy, I'm trying to help you. And then she did apparently hide the veil to try and go again to prevent the first collapse. So, you know, obviously she's a guardian, she's a ghost, the ghost disappeared. So do you think they're kind of setting that up for her to return as some kind of ally?
If not in final shape, then as some greater facet of the story of Destiny going forward. You know, like, I have to imagine that, especially when you look at the story of Xivu, there's got to be something involving Savathun.
Yeah.
You know, if the final shape involves Xivu being convinced that she needs to not be on the side of the Witness, I have to imagine that we're going to bring back Savathun, who, remember, has died after freshly learning that the Witness deceived her and deceived her entire species.
Yeah.
So it's this thing of like, you have a very personal reason to go out there and try and liberate your sister, so to speak, from this huge misunderstanding.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a great dynamic there, but it's also just one of those things of Savathun is an ace in the hole for Bungie to deploy whenever they feel like the story needs it. And I'm sure that if they're looking at Destiny beyond Final Shape, which inevitably they will have written a bunch of stuff already several years ahead of things, you're probably looking at something where there are plans for Savathun. You know, a ghost did not escape for no reason whatsoever. So yeah, I think that something is going to happen. We just don't know when or where.
So as far as the enemies of Destiny, we only have the Witness, Xivu, and some of the worms. Are there any others? That's kind of it, right? And I guess any other disciples that could be there. But the main enemies that have been there the whole time would be the Witness, Xivu, and a couple of the worms, who I think are probably still around.
Yeah, and
Anything
it really
else?
depends on the perspective of the worm gods too, because, you know, they were subjugated by Rulk, and Rulk's death now, and the destruction of certain facilities in Savathun's throne world. There's a bunch of stuff going on there where their allegiance is maybe questionable. It kind of really depends. I think the other really big ones to look at are the Fanatic, Fikrul, who is the minor of the two. He is the only other person with potential control over the Scorn, which of course is one of the arms of the Witness's forces now. It's questionable whether he would be able to actually pull them apart from anything as powerful as the Witness, but, you know, it's not impossible that we could see something like that in the storyline. And of course, the really big one, Aramis. Aramis has been pretty consistently appearing in the storylines for the past few seasons. I mean, we saw her in Season of the Plunder, we saw her in Season of the Seraph, and we've seen her in Season of Defiance. And in all of this, I think it's leading up to this moment where she is going to properly turn on the Witness and is going to sort of bow to Ido.
Seems that way, yeah.
Yeah, in this way of saying, like, hey, at very least, I'm going to take House Salvation out of the picture. And, you know, I imagine that there is unfortunately going to be, like, a heroic death as opposed to a redemption arc for her, which, you know, I imagine there's a bunch of stuff going on there because the Witness is still an incredibly powerful enemy, and betraying it doesn't seem like it's a great idea for one's personal health. But yeah, her story has been moving on that trajectory for a long time. I can't imagine that we're not sitting there and seeing something to do with that. The other really big one for me as well is the Nine. You know, the Nine are a total wild card in all of this. You know, like, there are some bits and pieces that we have no decent information about. It's clear that there's a subsection of them that are trying to help us, and it's clear that there's a subsection that are trying to be completely independent of us, which is, I mean, Nine Law, basically they are dependent upon life in order for them to even exist. They are dark matter given form by us. You know,
I was about to ask. There's supposed to be some kind of like dark matter, which is an energy in the universe in real life that we still don't fully understand, but it seems to be unaffected by gravity and particles, and they're kind of what's the word, like immaterial like beings. But then, yeah, it's a good question. What happened to the Nine? Are the Nine still? Is it possible we can still? What's the latest? When did we last hear about them? Was it the prophecy? And
I mean, it's been a while, honestly. Trying to think about it, it's probably been, maybe it is prophecy. Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but when it comes to it, like, the actual thing about the Nine is always, hey, they're playing around with a lot of scientific concepts here, so if we get anything wrong, call Neil deGrasse Tyson. I promise he will have better answers than us, but
explain what dark matter and dark energy are, which is
exactly
who even knows.
It's I think that if you see a storyline in the future that revolves around the Awoken, and in particular Seer Ido, you will definitely have something going forward that revolves around the Nine and their story, and anything involving Queen Mara is potentially going to involve the Nine. So
and then, how about the Taken? Who is in control of the Taken? Do we know? Is Xivu in control of the Taken?
The Witness is in direct control of the Taken at this current point in time. Okay. It seems clear that they have been used and directed by Xivu as shock troops, but as far as the original creator of the Taken, and as far as the one who really is pulling all the strings, it's definitely the Witness. They have the ultimate final say of everything. Right. Which makes sense. That's kind of the Witness's MO with any of its servants. It wants to be in this position where it's able to sit there and just, you know, consistently control and get results out of things. You know, it's part of the reason why when Calus was sitting there and giving it a little bit of pushback, it went furious on him and, you know, gave the whole enough moment.
Where some emotion.
Yeah, it's one of the only times we've seen the Witness break its monotonous drawl, and that's kind of important. Yeah, no, mindless servants, that's what the Witness really wants, and Taken are just that.
Do you think the Witness is in some kind of like parallel dimension? Because we never actually see them interact with anything. They seem to be, you know, there's always the glass thing. What do you think the glass thing represents, the shattered glass? They always seem to be like just as if they're not really there, as if you're kind of seeing them through a dream. And I've seen lots of theories, there's been lots of speculation about the broken glass, and like we never see the Witness actually do anything physical in the world because they might be trapped in some kind of other dimension. What do you think is the deal there?
Hard to speculate on any of that, but I imagine that if you're looking at the powers the Witness uses, you're looking at something to do with darkness. It's deeply ingrained within emotions and the subconscious in someone's mind. So when you sit there and you actually see Calus after these visions, you know, most of the time it's going to be this moment where Calus has been dreaming and wakes up after the vision. which is really something. Most of the time when you actually sit there and see those things, though, it may just be that the witness is using things to kind of alter reality a little bit and alter someone's perspective of it at very least. So, impossible to tell at this moment in time. There is nothing solid in the lore that tells us anything about that. There's maybe Osmiomancy Gloves gives us an idea, but that's more about the Taken and the witness's potential ability to pull worlds in and out, and I don't know. Yeah, all sorts of things. We'll see.
And then something for final shape. Do you think they will do a sixth element, a third darkness subclass, or do you think they'd leave it at 5? Do you think there'll be another one?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When it comes to the symmetry of things, it's...
Something all the world's most successful people have in common is they're constantly learning new things every day. We all know the mental benefits as well as the career benefits, but maybe you find reading walls of text or watching lectures a bit boring. Brilliant.org gamifies learning in an interactive way, so you learn by doing through these puzzles and games and challenges that actually give you XP and let you see progress. They have thousands of lessons and new ones added monthly on subjects like math and science and coding and AI, which in this day and age are all the most valuable skills for the highest paying jobs. Whether you're a complete beginner and just want to keep your mind sharp or are already studying for a career in one of these, you can select your comfort level and it tailors it for you. But I especially like that these are gamified visualizations. That's always been the best way that I learn. I'm a very visual person, and it's also been proven you learn better by doing. So by using this link, you can actually try everything they have free for 30 days, and the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. So head to brilliant.org/unknownplayer to get that free trial and discount. Thanks to them for sponsoring the episode.
It's not as though it's subtly implied, but it's also not directly stated. It's just very heavily assumed that when we go into Final Shape, we will be getting a final subclass. I would expect it would be something along the lines of resonance, whatever that ends up being. The kind of similar power that we saw Calus wield in his boss fight, the similar power that we've seen out of Rolk and the Caretaker, and anything to do with pyramid tech generally. I think that us wielding resonance is going to be the last thing that happens, and that'll probably be a journey that we set off along when we actually defeat the witness. Yeah,
that would make sense. I think it's going to be interesting to see how they even do it, because Strand, I think, was very, very, very impressive. I think it's probably the best designed subclass in Destiny. I think that's easy to say because it is the most recent. They've had the most time to work on it. So it is the most unique. But as far as how everything works and the threadlings and the hatchlings and all the different mechanics, there's no other. It really does, even though they updated the light subclasses to kind of be on some level, and they have all the like the verbiage with the scorch and the burn and the volatile and weak and all that stuff. It's still Strand, definitely. You can tell the difference between Bungie designing a subclass now, and obviously there's Bungie a lot of talk about
a subclass from 9 years ago, right?
Yeah, we've seen obviously a lot of talk about how it might have been some kind of poison subclass, and I for one am definitely glad it wasn't. Initially I did like the idea of poison. I thought poison would be very cool, but as a lot of people have said, it would be hard to make it not just be another just burn damage over time. But what they did do with Strand, it was, I think the one issue with Strand is that it wasn't introduced very well. As we said with the campaign, giving you this just trash version of Strand with just no fragments, and you're trying to learn this new expansion and trying to explore Neptune. That just wasn't the time to be trying to learn this very neutered version of Strand. So it kind of, they keep giving you this if you're playing legendary mode, this very difficult boss fight, and then they give you all these Strand grapple points. It's I don't want to be grappling around this arena. I want to go invisible and use actually powerful stuff. But then obviously after you beat the campaign, and after I think week 2 or something, when most of the fragments are unlocked, then you actually start to see Strand is actually one of the best subclasses in the game. Very powerful. Suspend is just ridiculous. It's one of the most fun things ever. Just be able to completely immobilize enemies and champions and tormentors. Suspend is very, very cool. But Strand shaped up to be very well, but the version that you get during the campaign almost makes you not want to play it, because again, they give it to you and then it's gone for 20 seconds, and then you get it for 20 seconds, then it's gone. But it turned out to be very, very good. But if they were to do, or if/when they do a 6th and 3rd darkness element, I'm interested to see, because obviously grapple and movement was the theme of Strand. I wonder what kind of big gameplay thing this sixth one will be based around, because it definitely obviously will be it won't just be another damage over time thing. It'll be something unique, but who knows whether it's like building or I don't even know. I'm trying to imagine where Bungie, because none of us could have imagined Strand, but that does interest me, the thought of what this sixth one would be, and that it is not that long away to get 2 new subclasses back to back, which would be cool.
Yeah, I also have to say that as far as Strand is concerned, whilst the other subclasses have had very strong visual identities, because most of them are elements, I mean, you know, electricity, fire, ice, this has had a very strong narrative identity, you know, strands of the universe being pulled apart and the threads of fate and consciousness. Like, the lore around Strand in particular was actually something worth making a video about this time around, where with Stasis, it was kind of just like, I mean, cosmic ice, you know. I'm like, yeah, sure, there's things about control and darkness and corruption and certain bits and pieces, but nowhere near as strong as the stuff that they've written about Strand, where you could sit there and you could legitimately understand why certain aspects of Strand visually are the way that they are, and how some of these powers manifest in the way that they do. You know, it's a really fascinating story aspect with Strand being the way that it is. And it, you know, it makes perfect sense as to why some of these things can just appear out of nowhere as well. You know, any living thing, even a Vex, which is technically a bunch of microscopic organisms inhabiting a frame, they have some kind of thought to them, and therefore you can affect them with the threads of Strand, the threads of everything that binds them together, you know? There's really cool ideas in that, and the fact that it does just holster up out of nothing and that you can grapple to anywhere because the web is everywhere. You know, these are really cool ideas to display within the subclass and the actual gameplay of it. Like, for all of Strand's failure to be kind of something that was well integrated in the campaign, in the other sense, where you look at Strand and its lore and how it's, you know, integrated into everything else, absolutely incredible. Seeing it and actually reading up on some of that lore made me chuckle, because I sat there and I was like, damn, if we just learned about this in this context alone, and this had been like a totally different side quest from the campaign, and we'd seen all of this detail and it wasn't integrated, yeah, that would have been amazing. I would have loved to see like a 3-mission quest or something, where in each of them you start to learn all these new aspects about Strand and understand about like, hey, you are tugging on the threads of fate here. Like, awesome stuff. Just, yeah, they've written some really great stuff about Strand, and I can't go on about how much I love that. Yeah,
no, I think Strand is tough shoes to fill, but I think it ended up being very solid, very, very solid. Talking about Nezarec, our old friend Nezarec, that was obviously a character we saw, which is very impressive. We saw in 2017 Nezarec Sin, the Warlock helmet, and then it's funny, I didn't even I'm not sure if anyone else connected the dots, but the whole his helmet looking exactly the same as the Scions, then obviously the connection with the Scions. I feel like I never even, because they redesigned the Scion helmet between Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, but I feel like I never saw anyone connect the dots that the Scion's helmet is actually the same as Nezarec's, and then obviously in this lore we find out that Nezarec used to be some kind of ruler in the old, before the Scions were slaves of the Cabal. But the connection there was very interesting.
Yeah, I imagine I've seen 1 or 2 people say it over the years, and I've just brushed it away, and now 6 years later, their chickens have come back to roost, which is great fun for them. And I'll honestly sit here and say it, the way they've written Nezarec is excellent. Yeah. Because they, in most instances, we expect to learn everything about a raid boss and to truly understand them and who they are and where they come from. That's very much the way it was done with Rulk. This is not a Rulk situation. Nezarec is very much a being, an entity, where Rulk was a character that you could dissect motive-wise. Nezarec is more of just this kind of presence, this force.
Nightmare.
Even after Nezarec dies, they sit there and say that they will haunt our quietest moments when everything is at peace. They will haunt our dreams. And the fact that Nezarec says this is not an empty threat. It's something that he's done before. He has been there when the Scions have come along and, been overwhelmed and their old culture was overthrown for the quote-unquote God thoughts. They literally sacrificed people to Nezarec, there are moments at which Nezarec has interacted with Guardians and with other individuals throughout Sol, and those moments are pretty clear and definitively showing the power of Nezarec and how it's really almost completely unavoidable. Like, and you got to remember, some of these moments, particularly when he's interacting with Guardians and with individuals in Sol, he's dead when all this is happening. Savathun's already killed him once at this point. So Nezarec can't die, is the really clear conclusion of all this.
That was going to be my question. Is he dead when he says that he's going to haunt you? Is that more like metaphorical, as in he's just kind of in your nightmares? Do you think he'll come back, or do you think it's just kind of, as you said, the default of Nezarec, he just is this nightmarish being that always haunts people?
I think that it's got to the point where Nezarec is so psionically powerful that as long as there's pain and as long as there are nightmares out there, Nezarec is going to be able to feed. And that's, you know, in a certain way, Bungie has pulled on some really scary concepts there and has created a villain that could very well be recurring. You know, imagine if we do eventually beat the Witness and in another 5 years' time, when it's whatever's going on with Destiny, we discover that Nezarec is actively creating something else where he's able to just continuously feed on pain, and it's this completely untouchable pocket universe. It's like, I'm going to grow in power, and in however many years, I'm going to be back, and then I will get my revenge. Like, can you imagine that? Like, there is potential here for this villain. I mean,
keeps returning.
And also, this time maybe he will have an even better dad bod.
Maybe you can get a better shape, a better final shape this time.
This time I have a grill.
maybe you can shed some light on this. Where does Nezarec stand with the Witness and us? 'Cause I didn't really understand. Like, is Nezarec our enemy? Why does he kind of like hate us? And is he? I can understand he had his thing with Savathun, but I don't really understand why he's our enemy and where he stands with the Witness still, because the Witness had a shrine to him on his pyramid, and that's why he got resurrected accidentally by the Traveler, who was awful aim and somehow managed to resurrect some kind of demon. Good job, Traveler. But yeah, like, so, what's the relationship like there?
So this is part of what I was talking about a little earlier in the cast, where it shows how messy the allegiances to the Witness have really gotten. Nezarec is following the Witness and is a loyal servant of the Witness. And it's really weird to say that, because the original indications in the lore seemed to point to this idea that he opposed sword logic and that, you know, he just wanted as much life to be out there as possible so that he could experience all of its suffering, you know, and that's very contrary to what the Hive's version of the sword logic was. And that was the only thing we knew about anything close to the final shape. So for a very long time, that was a very easy assumption to make, but it's actually been clarified a lot in the lore that the Witness has allowed these other disciples like Nezarec to exist alongside the Hive and to exist alongside Rorke with their opposing opinions of what the final shape is and what's really going on with it, and to just sort of like exist in this narrative where it can be any of these things at any moment for any one of the disciples, because the Witness doesn't really seem to care, or at very least the Witness knows what it truly is and doesn't have the time to explain it. All of that is to say that Nezarec is serving the Witness, but he's an opportunist, you know, in this sense he is this parasite that feeds on terror. And so when the Witness was forced out of our system, he persisted and still exists, and any being that was inflicting cruelty, such as Earth's warlords, aka Guardians before they actually were good and had just risen with this incredible power and the ability to resurrect after death, you know, he took a great deal of interest in all the suffering that they doled out to people. So yeah, it's this thing of like, their relationship to us is very opportunistic. And even in the moments of Lightfall, it's clear that the reason they were haunting the citizens of Neomuna is because they were trying to get our attention, you know? They wanted us to come along so that we would actually accelerate things within the Witness's pyramid ship and would actually free them. You know, they view us as a tool, but they're also a force that is way beyond us. So it's a very roundabout way of saying, like, hey, they're still faithful to the Witness, but the suffering that Nezarec is seeking consistently is still around even without the Witness in the picture. You know, us Guardians are a great mechanism of delivering that. And, you know, he says as much during the raid. He's very happy to sit there and sort of congratulate us about the way that the warlords, and it's pretty visceral, the way the warlords made people scream. You know, like this is some really screwed up shit.
Yeah, I like the back and forth. I like the idea of the raid boss like talking to you throughout the raid. That seems to be a thing since Rolk and with Nezarec. Just this like the fact you have this final boss like taunting you and like having a bit of dialogue as the raid progresses, and then you actually reach this moment. I thought that was a good touch. But speaking of the raid, that was obviously quite a well, probably mostly critical as far as many saying it was too easy, especially contest mode. What were your thoughts on that?
I think that it's really weird when you sit there and you look at something like Neomuna and the enemies out there on patrol are technically tougher than the raid enemies. I mean, that... it's just very odd.
I couldn't understand. I was like, why are they still swords? I was like, you keep leveling up, and it's like, are they going to become like normal at any point? Why are they still? And there's like, oh, apparently it's just always got contest mode on in patrol. It's like, why is patrol harder than the contest mode raid?
And like, I'm fine with patrol being a little bit harder. It actually makes Neomuna a very engaging area, but the I think it's the sort of how weird it feels in contrast to the raid, where you would sit there and you would, you know, on day one, you know, things were a little bit harder, a little trickier, but like, you know, you'd be sitting there at the moment when contest came off and you were just smacking things back and forth with a glaive in one hit, and you're like, what am I doing? This is totally brainless. Like, mind off. Meanwhile, in Neomuna, you know, you're actually using cover and you have to deploy a proper build, and you're sitting there and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm doing all of this stuff and I'm properly engaged in the combat. It's a really weird place to be. It made it great for when I was trying to explain the raid to a bunch of people, and like, that's fantastic, but not everybody is sitting there being the lore nerd of each raid. So yeah, no, the the one silver lining there exists in the minority of people who are sitting there and expecting the raid to be so easy that they can literally tell a story at the same time.
Yeah,
I'll say this too. Endgame content should be endgame, you know? Like, yeah, the master raid exists, but it leads me to the idea and the question mark, and I really want to know what you think of this. Do you reckon that this was made with the intent of ensuring that it launched alongside the LFG feature, which was potentially delayed? Because if you ask me, this would have been a perfect raid to launch with LFG.
It's a good point. And they did initially plan it to be around the same time, and they had to push it back, right? It was initially...
Yeah, which, you know, assuming that is indeed what's happened, it would make perfect sense, because you're sitting there and you have LFG opening up with a much easier raid experience, but something that is immediately relevant to the times. You know, I think, I can't help but think that's what's happened, but what do you think? I think
that the raid mechanically is very simple. Like, I think it's one of the simplest raids. You literally just stand in the thing, shoot the ball, go here. It's just, it is very, very simple mechanic wise. It's very simple to explain. I was surprised how easy, like, I was, you know, used to previous raids of just like, you know, we've got to memorize 26 symbols and you got to turn left and spin around 3 times and shoot the dove and then change weapons and then like try and recite the alphabet backwards. Like, it's just ridiculously complex mechanics that you just get used to. Mainly just symbols of just like, it's the downward facing bird that's eating an orange. Like, it's just like, I don't even know what that's, just symbols are mainly, and that was very prevalent in Val. But mechanic wise, it was very simple, very easy to explain. Like, I didn't even plan on doing contest mode. I was like, nah, I'll just do the regular mode. Like, I'm good. I don't really feel like the soul crushing stress of contest mode. But then it came out. I mean, it's funny. I was watching the raid race as it came out, and I was making food while it was out. And then by the time I had sat down with my food, they were on the final boss already. And I was like, wait, what happened? And then by the time I came in here to watch the rest of it, someone had already like nearly killed Nezarec. And I was like expecting this, like this whole, this is going to be just on in one of my monitors just all night. And, you know, for 6 hours, 12 hours, just see how they do. And I was like, oh, they've already like beat it. Like, and then I was very surprised how quickly it was done. And then, yeah, and the next day, and then got a group, and then it was like, oh, I guess I did zero prep at all. Obviously I was leveled, but that's not too difficult. But yeah, ended up doing contest mode, and it wasn't the entire raid. I think we just one phase like all of it. And then Nezarec Nezarec took us a few hours, although we did get hit with the glitch where you kill him and then he kills you at the same time, which was quite annoying.
Oh, the worst.
I think they fixed it since, but we literally like did enough damage. He's dead. Health bar is empty. And then he's still, it's just when he starts the wipe mechanic at the same time as you kill him, and then he wipes you anyway. And then, yeah, but that was annoying. But yeah, for contest mode, I don't know. I think it's pretty, a lot of people, it's a very divisive subject. There's a lot of gatekeepy conversations and a lot of elitist conversations. But I think, the raid is the raid. It's meant to be difficult. And the contest mode is meant to be the most difficult thing in all of Destiny.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's any downside to the contest mode raid being difficult. I don't think that many people should disagree that the contest mode should be not accessible to most people. And I was prepared to be like, it's too much stress.
I'm going to jump in there and say something here. Accessibility and difficulty have all to do with each other. Like, they are not related conversations, right? Like,
they should
when
be,
when it comes down to it, it's why I'm very much for the idea of having something like VOW, where you had... I mean, technically this wasn't planned, but you had 48 hours worth of contest mode time. That's good, but also make it a hard raid. I'm okay with it being hard on that first moment, especially considering this is what the peak and pinnacle of most Destiny players are going for. Your team that has come together in the last few moments and has just kind of assembled out of nowhere, occasionally they actually can win worlds first. Like, sure, that does happen, but for the most part, it is now teams that are of that caliber where they're practicing a whole ton and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And like, when it truly does come down to it, that's what I think day one contest raiding should be about. Like, it is spectacle and it is stunning, and it should be one of those moments where you are watching your favorite teams push forward. It really should be that kind of contest of wills. And I'm okay with that. I'm glad we no longer have the kind of like incredible Riven experiences where two teams make it, but I'm also not in the place where I think that we should have been looking at contest mode being quite as easy as it was. I
think it makes it more of a spectacle. Like, I'm not saying it should be full on Last Wish, but I wouldn't even be too mad if it was like close, because there's something, it makes it interesting. If it's like, oh, have you heard this new raid? It's so difficult. Like, people, it creates just more of an interesting conversation of like, well, it's so difficult, only two teams. Like, the way people talk about Last Wish adds to its kind of legendary status, and you just can't get that by it being easy. And I think a lot of people here, when you hear like, I guess, players who play it, like really hardcore experienced players say it's too easy, some people hear that as if like it's kind of gatekeeping, like, no, casual players shouldn't be able to do that. But it's not really that. That's kind of secondary. The main argument that more experienced players would have is that if you want to do something that's difficult, you want the feel. If you want to do something impressive, it has to feel like it's difficult and like you did something that most people can't do. It has to be something impressive. But if it's something that's just, oh yeah, you just hop on, grab an LFG and do contest mode without too much thought, then you don't feel like you accomplished much. And I think that's what most people are getting at. They want to feel like, I did something difficult that is hard, like we did Last Wish.
We didn't do that thing, right?
Yeah.
And respectfully, like, when it comes down to it, again, it's another reason why I'm very pro 48 hours, because you should have your chance to try. It should be hard. Like, we should make the thing literally as easy to access as possible. Like, legendary campaign giving you the bumps to get up to level. Yeah, go for it. Like, getting the exotic ciphers out of your season pass track and whatnot, and getting the ability to get a few key exotics that might help you if you're doing it first time. Absolutely. But it's a hard grind to get there, and you will absolutely be going up against some of the most skilled teams in the world. So like, it's going to be really, really tricky doing all of that.
I think the feeling that we have about Last Wish, because we did it, I think we got like nearly top 100. I think our team was like top 10 on console, because almost everyone was on PC. We were one of the only people playing console. But we have a sense of accomplishment, because it was like, that was very difficult, and we were just like throwing ourselves against a wall for just like, I don't even know how many hours. But then once you do it, you get accomplishment. But and again, I'm not saying every raid should be like that, but you create the feeling of, I did something impressive when it's difficult and hard to do. And it's not about it's not about casual players not being able to do it. It's about skilled players being tested. It would be satisfying to go on Twitch or YouTube live stream and to see, so these are some of the best players in the world and they are struggling. It makes you feel like a sense of, oh, this is a big deal. But when they just kind of breeze through it, it's a bit like, oh, guess that's the raid. But
and here's the other thing, right? These comments, it should be made really clear as well, apply to contest mode. Like the first 48 hours worth of the activity. Afterwards, I'm very okay with the idea of a raid dropping down in terms of difficulty.
Absolutely.
Like, those skilled players will then call it easy no matter what, even if it isn't a Nezarec situation, because it is just one of those moments where they are built for this. They're geared properly. They are prepared. They're ready. You know, like when we sit there and ended up completing Last Wish for the first time, you know, we were amongst 1,000 players in the world that had done that. We are both of us have 2 of the 1,000 or so Riven jackets in existence. But when you sit there and look at Riven now, yeah, it's a really, compared to most other bosses, it's actually quite a tough experience, but
very mechanical.
It's actually still got the mechanical kind of density to it that gives you that sense of satisfaction. But you can teach it, you know, you can sit there and you can bring someone along for the ride, and you can make it so that they're not just sitting in the back constantly. Like, they can have a role in the thing. They can actually pick up bits and pieces to it that they need to do. And every member of the fire team can feel really important there. So, you know, it's one of those moments where this moment, these 48 hours at the beginning of it, are really the kind of the basis of this conversation, you know? Like, this is something which you are tailoring to a certain proportion of the player base, right? And on the flip side of things, you know, it's like, this is something which should be not so, this is something that shouldn't be easy, right? This is something which should test you and should give you that sense of pride and accomplishment. Haha, I know, indeed. The meme. But, you know, contrast that with a campaign, right? Campaign, I would say you should sit there and it's something where everyone needs to be able to access that. And it needs to be easy. It needs to be something where at the first outset, yeah, you can absolutely have your legendary mode, particularly if you're trying to prep for a raid. But when you're looking at the campaign itself, making it so that it is easy is never something I think I'm going to complain about. Like Destiny 2 vanilla, you know, everybody gives Bungie a hard time for this particular one little bit, but they actually made one of the first puzzle rooms in the first mission easier to complete. And you know, this is something where it's got that thing where it was just like a spinning little rod within the platform that could kill you if it hit you.
Yeah.
You know, like there were people who were ridiculing everybody for not being able to do that. But you got to remember, like, those are the campaign missions where some people are picking it up and playing for the first time. Yeah. They may not be in that place where they're that dexterous with jumping. So
yeah, there used to be the 2 rotating things, and then again, players like us, it was just a simple step down. But to some people, if you never played Destiny before, maybe you got stuck there for a while.
And it's like, that's the exact inverse of this conversation, if you get what I mean. Like, this is a moment where it's clearly going to be played by everyone, whereas a contest raid day 1 is not. And it's something where people are absolutely going to watch, but it's something where players are preparing for the hardest possible experience in Destiny, and they're looking for something that's going to test their mettle and give them a sense of accomplishment and provide them some glory if they complete it, you know? And I think that's kind of, you build for the experience you're aiming to create. And in the instance of a campaign, you're aiming to create something that is easy so that people can actually get into it. And that if it is your first time ever playing a first-person shooter, it's not totally brutal. You wouldn't put someone who's never played a first-person shooter through Last Wish on week 1. You know, conversely, you wouldn't put a contest mode raid at the level of difficulty of a first campaign mission in a shooter. You know, like, it's just two different beasts, so to speak. So yeah, that's kind of the way I'd go ahead and frame it, is just like, build for the experience as it's supposed to be, you know, like, absolutely make it accessible, like, give everybody the tools, like the full auto tool, for example, fantastic. The ability to sit there and say like, hey, Destiny is now compatible with, you know, more colorblindness options from way back when in the day, like, give people the ability to play the game, make it easier for people to actually play the game to the same level of skill that professionals do. I'm okay with everything on that particular front of it. Because, you know, like, people should be able to play and enjoy the depth that this game offers. But then, you know, give everybody who has been given that equity the challenge all at once and give them all the glory. Like, I think, you know, I really want to go ahead and see that. it's why I'm so glad to see the community celebrate the big dubs when something does come along. Like, there was an entire fire team that was, I believe it was mute. And everyone in this fire team completed a raid, and they would use emotes and the text chat for callouts. And it's just like, when you sit there and see people coming together and doing things like that, it's like, it's not totally perfect, but you are actually sitting there and providing an experience that people can complete. And that's where I think we should be aiming for as far as the pride goes with everything.
Their level of accomplishment must be massive for that. I mean, you mentioned the that full auto little setting. Have you turned that on? That is,
I've turned it on for everything.
I think that's low key like one of the best things of Lightfall. Like, it doesn't even matter about accessibility. I think it's more about honestly just trying to not get carpal tunnel. Like, because spamming the trigger for just like 6 hours and like using, it depends what weapons you're using, but like pulse rifles and stuff. Like, I use the collective obligation, which is it's just ridiculously good, not overpowered. Please don't nerf it, Bungie, but like, it's ridiculously good in the, especially with the Void 3.0 build. Every time you get a kill, it refreshes your ammo. So you literally just hold the trigger and then just look, and everything just dies, and you're just spreading buffs to everything, but not having to spam the trigger every single day. You're just going to go through several controllers. I mean, I've gone through several like controllers because they just the trigger just dies out after a certain. It's plastic at the end of the day, so it's just going to break down. But simply being able to, that's just one of the littlest things that I personally really enjoyed. And again, accessibility or not, save you getting carpal tunnel from having to spam the trigger, grinding Destiny for hours on end. That it was a really, really nice touch. And yeah, as far as the raid in general, I think it's also worth noting contest mode is like, we're talking about Last Wish. Contest mode is also in a very good place. I think, again, it could have been a little bit tougher this time around, but even using for Vow, it's just the contest mode is another example of how polished Destiny 2 is right now, and how it's just in a state that they wish they could have had back in 2017. Like, even if you go to Last Wish, that was one of the reasons why it was such a mess, was because back before then, you could level as high as you want, but it was incredibly difficult. And the raid came out, I think, like, what, 2.5 days after the expansion. So you had to pretty much play the game non-stop, get every single powerful and pinnacle. And then, of course, if you were like me, you had the Petra glitch and you lost out on the most powerful.
It was 10 days. It was 10 days.
Oh, was it?
We had a whole reset, but it didn't change the fact that it was so high that everybody had. Yeah, it was so high that everybody still had so much.
It was a whole 10 days, and it was still like
absolutely absurd.
If you didn't play every single day, you would be behind. And then it was a case of nobody was even at the recommended level of the raid. Whereas now it's like it's in a perfect place, because you can just over level, and then it doesn't matter what you are, you're just all evenly capped at the same levels. It's a perfect way to gauge difficulty, and it isn't this just RNG mess of trying to get to this impossible level.
Let's give everybody a bit of perspective. The hard cap, the pinnacle cap didn't exist back in the day. There was only the soft cap and the hard cap, right? Soft cap was how high you could get with just blues and random legendary gear that didn't have any specific drop value. And that was 500 light, right? When you got to 500 light, you would then have 100 levels worth of hard cap. Riven, the final boss, was 590. And most people were going into Riven at around about 550. Like, at the end of the first week, I was within the top 3 people as far as leveling was concerned. And I thought I was sitting pretty good at something close to, I must have been 540 at the time being. And like, I did all my pinnacles and I got a ton of stuff, and I felt like I was in a really great place. And the raid still kicked my booty. Like, it was so
still
hard.
Swords. But for me, they were skulls.
Skulls when we went in, dude. It was skulls on that.
Do you remember the Petra glitch? It was
pretty much lost your Oracle offering.
Yeah, the Oracle offering. That's what it was. It was the Oracle, which was like the highest. It was like a +7. It was like a crazy powerful drop that you get from Petra. And if your inventory was full when you picked up like some quest, it just wouldn't give you a reward. And of course, typical bugs just that happen. We didn't know that at the time, so I and a couple other people happened to be unlucky enough to miss out on the most powerful drop. So I was severely underleveled, and that was what made Last Wish punishing. And that's, again, someone who played every single day, it was still like you had no chance of even being close to the recommended level of the raid. But yeah, it's just nice to see how another example of the game being very polished now. Contest mode is very clean. Again, the difficulty is definitely up for debate, but at least the system, it makes sense and it's consistent, at least, which I think is good.
I think as well, it's still one of our proudest moments, because it's one of those things of like, no matter what, we just didn't give in. Like,
yeah,
we were dead set on getting our ribbon jackets, and damn it, we got them.
But then it's like diminishing returns, because the longer you try and you're just like sleep deprived, it just becomes ridiculously difficult. If you just like actually take a break, get some sleep, and then come back, we always just do it like first time, the next time. But it's just like throwing yourself at it and just hoping it works. But speaking of some obviously sad news, we had the passing of Lance Reddick, and that obviously is quite many would say is the most significant, most memorable, most recognizable characters in Destiny. What do you think that means for the future of the Zavala character? Do you think, like, obviously it's speculation, but do you think they have the voice lines recorded ready for final shape? Do you think they'll have to just axe off the character early? Do you think they'll have someone else do the voice lines, which I would personally doubt? But what do you think this means, like, for the game? Do you think the Zavala character will continue? Because, again, he's one of the most significant characters in the game, so it's definitely a tricky one.
That's a good question. I know that there is meant to be more content in the future where Lance Reddick, before he passed, did manage to get recordings of stuff done. And, you know, like, that's part of why this, I think, takes us all by surprise, is just it was so sudden. And, you know, I think that if ever there is something for Season of the Deep or seasons going forward, we'll see that. I don't know about final shape. It's entirely possible. But as far as Zavala as a character, I feel like there is definitely going to be a moment at which they nobly step into the sunset, so to speak. And when that does happen, I don't know if it will be right to immediately replace them. I certainly don't expect Bungie to replace the voice actor. You know, this is not a Nathan Fillion as Cade in Forsaken kind of situation. This is very different. I feel as though also Destiny's attachment to Lance's performance, the community's attachment rather, is a really important thing to respect. You know, there were some people talking about recreating Lance Reddick and his voice with AI. There were some people talking about getting a stand-in, and I just don't think any of these are good suggestions for a multitude of different reasons, but most importantly because we all know that it's not going to be him. You know, it's
and the difference is that with other characters, like even with like Gina Torres, Akora, a lot of these characters have been replaced due to just like scheduling issues, or maybe the difficulty negotiating prices. And a lot of Destiny's voice actors are very famous actors that probably can command high fees. And maybe there was trouble in trying to just get these people locked down to do these voice lines for a game that maybe they had other priorities. But obviously in this case, with someone passing, it's very different. So I don't think you would, again, whether you can replace him is a whole nother conversation, because that's almost impossible. There is nobody that's Zavala. Lance has one of the most unique voices, and Zavala's voice is so just unique and recognizable. It's impossible for anyone else to. It would just be horrendous for someone else to be doing an impression of him, and it just wouldn't make any sense. But
you know what's crazy? Alongside our Guardian voices, which, you know, some of them were cut and some of them were compounded into whichever gender you'd chosen, but alongside our Guardian voices, I'm just sitting here and realizing he's the longest running voice actor that Destiny's had. Even Nolan North as the Ghost hasn't been doing it for as long, because, you know, replaced Peter Dinklage and came in during the time of the Taken King. And just, you know, when you sit there and you think about the impact that someone has had, they've been with us on this journey for a decade. That's kind of incredible. Like, you really can't think of any other character that has that kind of that prominence within Destiny's
staple
communities, like public consciousness.
But as well as that, not only are you right about him being a staple, just voice actor wise for the game, and Zavala being a staple character, Lance also was a huge fan of Destiny and actually played the game. Some people were saying that he was playing, they looked on his account and said that he was even playing Destiny like 2 nights before. And he was regularly, you'd see him at events, you'd see him just like tweeting about, I'm playing the game. Like he actually, which isn't expected. Most voice actors, they, even a lot of Bungie employees don't even play the game. They just do their job. They might do lighting, they might do mocap, like, not everyone who makes and works on the game actually plays or enjoys the game, or maybe even gaming at all. Some people, it's just a job. You show up, you do your lines, you go home. I don't even know anything about Destiny or what this stuff is. I just do my job. But Lance actually was a huge Destiny fan, and that's why that's why the community has a special relationship with him, because he was actually a member of the community. And again, there's nothing wrong with not playing the game that you work on, but he very much so did, and he was actually a huge fan of the game. So that was what made it extra special.
I think that, for everybody in the community, it was very easy for us to all see and to expect and to understand the outpouring of both love and sorrow that came in that moment of his passing. I think it's a real testament to the impact that he's had on the community. And how loved as a character he really was, both as Zavala and IRL. That alongside everything to do with gaming stuff, I know that anyone who you asked about Lance Reddick from all of the other spheres where he was doing things, I mean, even down to Keanu Reeves, this is the guy who sat there and his other half sat there and asked him, hey, what do you want to do for your birthday? And he said, I want to go see Lance. It's just... We'd lost a really fantastic human being here alongside everything else. And, don't get me wrong when I say that the outpourings of love were kind of expected. It's not as though it was people calling it in at all. It was actually just, people felt duty to it.
It was a lot of shock and surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. People sat there and held vigil. And, I think the only other time I've seen people do that in a video game sphere was the Warframe community around a YouTuber called Total Biscuit, who kind of, the context there is that he and his review essentially helped to launch the game and Digital Extremes into a place where they could continue to develop things. As the developers put it in the time being, there was Warframe before and after the Total Biscuit video. And, Lance has had a similar impact, if not much, much greater over a decade. It's the only other time where I've sat there and seen people holding vigils and, putting their characters next to Zavala and doing something momentarily to honor someone within a video game. It's really special.
Yeah. Life is short, it's precious, and it is definitely not guaranteed. And this is just another reminder of that. And I think even more so, it says a lot how people talk about you once you're gone, and it's very evident with Lance, the kind of outpouring that kind of says a lot, a celebration of the life rather than dwelling too much on the temporariness of life. But how people talk about you and how people remember you definitely says a lot, and that's you can see it very clearly with Lance, and just the passion of how he did his job and how he just always was consistent. And is definitely a huge shock to everyone. Don't think anyone really knew quite how to handle that.
I think that there's definitely something to it as well. There's the joy that he brought. It's the one thing that I've resoundingly seen from people who talk about knowing Lance Reddick personally, was that he was just incredibly funny. Like he was somebody that was in the place where he was able to be humorous, and he would care and would put significant words on significant things, but this was a guy who remembered every day to laugh.
Very jovial, very you can just see it by his social media. You could see he just seemed to be a very lighthearted, just kind of fun person. But you never know what people are going through, what people are suffering with behind the scenes. Things can seem all good on the surface, but that's why you should always be grateful and make the most of life while we have it. But that was definitely a huge shock. But what happens with the game, we shall see. But definitely one of the most. It's crazy. I was literally editing a video and I was looking for a cutscene that had Zavala in it. And I had it open in one screen, and I was like he had his voice playing in the background. And I was just literally thinking at that point of like how iconic Zavala just the character and the voice was. I was thinking he is like the most legendary voice in Destiny. He's definitely the most recognizable. And then I remember, like, a recommended video popped up that was like RIP, and I was like, what is this, like clickbait? Is this like what? And I clicked on it. I was just like, how, like, right at the second that I was just watching a video to grab a cutscene to include in my video, right at the second this news breaks, and I was like, how is this even? The timing of it was just very strange.
I saw at first it was a TMZ article that broke for me, and I was ready to call foul and be mad at people and be like, how dare you, what the hell's going on? And then other articles started coming out and other places started reporting the same. I was like, oh my god, this isn't a sick, twisted joke. Oh my god, this is happening. Like, I was in total disbelief.
But yeah, rest in peace to Lance, legendary character, legendary artist, creator, voice actor. But we shall see how Destiny progresses. But yeah, we'll final shape, I would imagine there will be a lot of the main Vanguard. It's going to be interesting to see how they manage to move around the characters. And I mean, we didn't even see much of the Vanguard in Lightfall. I would assume.
Yeah.
Who do you think we'll see take the reins of final shape? I would imagine Akora. We haven't heard from Eris in a while either, and the Stranger.
I think we're probably looking at the Exo Stranger. I have to imagine if they do this really well, they'll tie it back into I don't even have time to explain what I don't have time to explain, which tells me that the Exo Stranger's got to be in there. But yeah, as for all the other characters, I don't know. This is our Avengers Endgame moment. I would say pull in all the faces, pull out all the stops, get everybody involved.
A character who, well, may or may not be returning. Amanda. What do you make of Amanda? Is she going to return? Will she be a Guardian? What do you think about that?
So I have to imagine that she will return at some point, especially considering the words being uttered over her vigil by Zavala himself. Bravery, devotion, sacrifice, which of course is something that has been continuously said over and over again as the things that Guardians must do in order to become a Guardian. It's this thing of you must sacrifice at the end, and a Guardian's life is those things. Amanda, regardless of whether she gets resurrected, was a lowercase g Guardian. She was someone who fought alongside everybody and put her life in danger to assist others. And it's more often than not those people that do get resurrected in some sense. Now, obviously, there are some big exceptions, and there are some things where it's really not necessarily been made clear what the Traveler's intentions are. I would point to Savathun and Crow as the biggest examples of that, but I imagine that's kind of like a next chapter kind of thing, end of final shape. If the Traveler ever wakes from its stupor, that's probably going to be something that happens.
Yeah,
but I don't know.
Definitely seen the Traveler seems to be quite cut and dry when it comes to resurrecting, of just like, if you fit this criteria, then boom, you'll be resurrected. If you do some kind of noble sacrifice, whether you're seen by us as good or bad, like you said, Aldrin and Savathun are key examples. Like, we see them as bad as at the time of what they did, but then the Traveler is very simple, just like, if you meet these criteria, I'll resurrect you, good or bad. But so Amanda definitely fits in that category with all the sacrifice and bravery. But the only difference this time is that the Traveler, again, we don't even know because it's not explained, but the Traveler is kind of gone. I mean, again, it's floated up in space. It's not very far away. It's just moved a little bit. But maybe the only exception is that the Traveler, and that's what kind of, I think Zavala kind of alluded to, that the Traveler is gone. So maybe it won't be able to resurrect Amanda now. But that seems to be the only difference. But again, what is even happening with the Traveler? The character seems to talk about it as if it's dead, but yeah, it hasn't moved very far. It's just floated a little bit further out into space, and now there's a portal. But whether that disables it, whether that stops it from resurrecting things, who knows? But it does seem like it's possible for Amanda to come back, and that would make sense, especially her and Crow's weird storyline that's going on there. It could make sense if she was resurrected, and then she would obviously be a whole different person. She would have no memory, and she'd be a different character altogether. But yeah, I think
as well, it's also worth remembering, if Amanda does come back, she won't be Amanda anymore.
Yeah,
you know, Guardians don't remember their past lives, and as a result, you're going to sit there with someone who's completely different.
Yeah, have some explaining to do. So going into Final Shape, what is your confidence level for Final Shape? I know you made your very critical video off the bat of Lightfall, but how do you feel now about Final Shape? Do you think, because before you answer, I honestly, it probably sound funny, but I think because Lightfall was very strange and kind of a mixed bag, I think that kind of is the reason why Final Shape will be better, because I do think most of the good stuff was saved for Final Shape. And again, it's all speculation. We don't know how exactly Bungie's development process went, but I think the reason that Lightfall was so just like a spin-off adventure is because Final Shape is the main content that was Lightfall, that Lightfall was going to be. But I don't know, maybe it's being optimistic, but I feel like Final Shape has a lot of the big stuff, and I think Lightfall was kind of an intermission. But how would you say, what's your confidence level going into Final Shape?
Mechanically speaking, as far as Destiny's future as a great first-person shooter, I'm really confident.
Yeah.
Narratively speaking, I mean,
there's a lot on the line.
You know, there's a lot on the line, and it is talking about wrapping up 10 years worth of stuff. And so the seasonal content has a lot of heavy lifting to do. The Veil quest ahead of Final Shape that's releasing next season has a lot of heavy lifting to do. The narrative itself needs to be impeccable, and it's not impossible for that to happen. You know, Bungie has done stranger things, and has, you know, I mean, from a studio that has done Witch Queen and Taken King and Forsaken, it is not at all impossible that after a bad expansion or a bad release, that something great follows it on its heels. What I would say is that when it truly does come down to Final Shape, Bungie needs to be incredibly careful. Bungie needs to be in a position where they can not only wrap up story threads in a way that feels coherent, but lay the groundwork for what happens in the future in a way that doesn't feel as though they've completely copped out of telling the main story. It is a mammoth task. I do not envy anyone who is on the team having to make that happen. What I would say is Bungie on my team. And effectively, I'm always sitting there and I'm always hoping they do well. Of course, and it's not out of a sense of, you know, it's not out of a sense of to shill, because Lord knows I was the first to criticize Lightfall.
Very fairly so.
It was one of those things where I criticize people like this because I'm passionate about this game, and they've shown something which has added a whole load of stuff to not only my experience of gaming, but also everyone else's. So if you're really going to sit there and, you know, think about the future and how the narrative is going to do and how Final Shape will ultimately turn out to be, no, it's not impossible for it to be good. But you know, to say that I'm concerned would be an understatement. There's a lot of ground to cover, and there's a lot still to do. I think that as far as the game is concerned, it'll be a great first-person shooter no matter what. Like, I don't think that Bungie is going to be in a place where they launch something like Stasis in this condition. Like, you know, we're not going to have a Beyond Light launch again, I think. I do worry about the story, though. I really do.
Yeah, but
we'll see.
There's a lot on their plate. Like I said earlier about The Witness, they've got a lot of explaining to do in not a lot of time. So there's going to have to be a lot of build up with the seasons to kind of make stuff make sense. Fully agree with you. I think gameplay wise, Final Shape will be the best era of Destiny ever, because as we said, the game is very, very polished. Just the mod system, the entire, and how they're going to overhaul the leveling system, as they've said. I think they just continue to make Destiny 2 just polished and just functionally just clean, and taking the best of all the situations and doing away with things that we don't need, that are antiquated. And I think gameplay wise, when they just add a new expansion of just new stuff, like a new world, a new subclass, we would assume it's just going to be just more good stuff. But story wise, they've got a lot on their plate. But as you said, like, at the end of the day, we want Bungie to win. We want Destiny to be a good, fun game. It's in everyone's best interest. It doesn't bring us any joy to see things go wrong, like the story. It's not a good thing. Whereas some people, I'm sure, who just don't even like Destiny and kind of rooting for it to fail, they never would have liked it in the first place. But for people like most of us, would want the game to be good. We don't get pleasure out of the game being in a bad way. But yeah, I think I think your initial reaction video was very fair. And like you said, passion is the key word, and that's why it did so well, and a lot of people resonated with it, is because it struck a nerve and people agreed unanimously. And I think it's, I mean, I remember right after I finished the campaign, I was thinking like, oh, that like, what like was at first I was thinking like, was that it? I was thinking, because normally at the end of every campaign, there's always a big grand like surprising moment, a big epic cutscene, a big like revelation, something that's like, oh wow. But that didn't happen in Lightfall. It was just like a what just really happens. I was very disappointed after initially playing the campaign, and I was thinking like, oh man, I didn't really enjoy that. I'm kind of like, am I going to be the only one that kind of thought that was just a bit mid and like everyone else is praising this? But then unanimously, but everyone else was kind of, thankfully I wasn't the only one. I saw your video, I was like, okay, so at least Bife also feels a similar way. I'm not the only one that thinks that there was something off about this expansion. And then more and more comes out, and you know, everyone in the community kind of touched on the same. We all had the same feeling of something doesn't really add up about the story there. But
yeah, I just hope they can pull it together, man. It's a scary year ahead, but hopefully we get back into the place where we can be confident about Destiny's future.
But behind the scenes, it does seem like things are going well for Bungie. They did say that, what was it, a record for concurrent players?
Oh, yeah, no.
All-time high player numbers, and I'm sure all-time high revenue. They're making tons of money, and the player numbers seem very healthy. Like they did hit a new record with the daily active users, so that seems to be a good sign. How long it lasts and the retention of those players throughout the seasons will be interesting. The seasons, which didn't really touch on, the season has been very, very good. Some would say the story has been better than the campaign, but the season's been very impressive. And as we've said many times, the seasons are very solid, and I have full confidence that the seasons will continue to be very solid. Yeah, they're not that substantial. They can get a bit boring, but the changes that they said they're going to make to the leveling system and kind of making the game a bit less grindy should probably alleviate some of that, because having to level up and do the artifact levels every season, every couple months is a bit of a drag. But I think they're going to do away with a lot of that from what they've said. And the seasons, nothing new here. We've said it many, many times. The seasons are in a very strong place, and I think that'll continue to lead up to the final shape.
Yeah, I got to agree. And hopefully they keep the running trend, which is that seasonal content has still had some really strong story stuff. So yeah. Yeah,
but yes, that's been a giant Lightfall discussion. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed, and thank you, of course, Bye, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for watching and or listening. Of course, if you made it this far, you can leave a like on the video. You can rate 5-star and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening. But thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.